Have you ever looked at someone from your past and felt a wave of smug satisfaction believing you'd won? For Isabella, seeing her ex-husband Leo after 5 years was that moment. While she dripped in designer labels, he drove a car that belonged in a junkyard. She judged him, pitied him, and even laughed at him, confident she had chosen the better life, the wealthier life. But what she didn't know was that while she was busy looking down on his old Subaru, he was preparing to look down on the world from 40,000 feet. This isn't just a story about money, it's about the staggering difference between looking rich and being truly wealthy, and the day a woman's perfectly curated world came crashing down when she discovered the man she abandoned was not just successful, he was untouchable. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday, nestled between a bill for her quarterly couture subscription and a catalogue from Sotheby's. It was thick, cream-coloured cardstock, the kind of paper that cost more per sheet than most people spent on a week's groceries. The calligraphy, a swirl of gold ink, announced the union of Chloe Whittaker and David Vance. Isabella traced the elegant script with a perfectly manicured nail, a shade of crimson called Bourgeois Bordeaux. A wedding, in Aspen, in 3 weeks. A faint metallic taste of anxiety coated her tongue. Chloe and David were relics from a past life, her life with Leo. They were couple friends, the ones who had witnessed the slow, painful erosion of her first marriage. Seeing them again meant seeing him. "What's that darling?" Gregory asked, striding into their cavernous living room. He was a man sculpted by expensive tailoring and an even more expensive personal trainer. His voice, perpetually loud, as if to fill any room he entered, with his presence boomed off the minimalist white walls and Italian marble floors. He adjusted the Patek Philippe on his wrist, a casual movement designed to draw attention to its 5-figure price tag. "An invitation," Isabella said, holding it up. "Chloe and David are getting married. In Aspen." Gregory peered at it, a dismissive smirk playing on his lips. "Whittaker and Vance. Aren't they those artsy friends of your ex, the sculptor and the poet or whatever? She's a gallery owner and he's a novelist." Isabella corrected the words, automatic. "And yes, they were our friends. Well, I suppose we have to go. Aspen's a bore in the fall, but it would be rude not to show our faces." Gregory declared, already pulling out his phone, his thumb swiping decisively. "I'll have my assistant book the Starlight Ridge. Penthouse suite, of course. We'll fly private naturally. No point in rubbing shoulders with the common folk at Denver International." Isabella felt a familiar wave of relief wash over her. This was her life now, a world where problems were solved with a phone call and a limitless credit card. A world of penthouse suites, private jets, and the comforting insulation of extreme wealth. It was the world she had always craved, the one she had left Leo to find. Their divorce had been acrimonious, a battlefield of her ambition against his contentment. Leo, with his brilliant mind and his maddening lack of drive, had been happy in their small, charming bungalow, tinkering with circuit boards and processors in the garage. He spoke of changing the world and revolutionary tech, but all Isabella saw were mounting bills and a husband who wore the same worn-out jeans for days on end. She wanted galas. He wanted late nights in his workshop. She wanted a summer home in the Hamptons. He wanted to invest in a new oscilloscope. "I can't live on potential, Leo," she had screamed during their final explosive fight. "Potential doesn't pay for a mortgage. It doesn't buy a table at per se. I'm drowning here waiting for a breakthrough that's never going to come." His quiet response had infuriated her more than any shout could have. "The work is the reward, Izzy. I thought you understood that." But she hadn't. She had understood that her youth was fading and her dreams of a certain lifestyle were slipping through her fingers. When she met Gregory, a real estate mogul, who dripped brand names and talked in terms of quarterly earnings and asset portfolios, it was like breathing oxygen after holding her breath for years. He was tangible success. He was the scoreboard, and he was winning. Leaving Leo had been a calculated business decision. She had traded the uncertain stock of a brilliant but unproven inventor for the blue-chip security of established wealth. And in the 5 years since, every day had felt like a vindication of that choice. Her life with Gregory was a meticulously curated Instagram feed of luxury. Their apartment overlooked Central Park. Their closets were filled with runway fashion, and their vacations were a blur of five-star resorts and Michelin-starred restaurants. Yet the thought of seeing Leo again stirred something unsettling within her. Not regret, she told herself firmly. It was more like a morbid curiosity. What had become of him? The last she'd heard through the grapevine of mutual acquaintances was that he had moved out of the city, somewhere quiet, to focus on his work. She pictured him in a cramped apartment, probably still wearing those same old jeans, surrounded by soldering irons and dusty prototypes. A pang of something she refused to name, pity, perhaps pricked at her. "Is Leo going to be there?" Gregory asked, looking up from his phone. His tone was laced with a cruel sort of amusement. "He's David's best man," Isabella said, her voice tight. "Oh, this will be rich." Gregory chuckled, a deep, rumbling sound that held no real warmth. "A little reunion. It will be good for him to see you. See how well you're doing. Maybe it will motivate him to finally get a real job." Isabella managed a thin smile. Gregory loved the story of her ex-husband. It was a perfect foil for his own success, a narrative he deployed at dinner parties to highlight his own provider status. He was the hero who had rescued her from a life of mediocrity. As she looked around her perfect living room at the abstract art that cost more than her parents' house and the view that spanned half of Manhattan, she hardened her heart. Gregory was right. This trip to Aspen wouldn't be a reunion. It would be a victory lap. It was a chance to finally definitively close that chapter of her life and show not just Leo, but all their old friends that she had made the right choice. She would be gracious, of course. She would offer a sympathetic smile and ask him how he was managing. But underneath it all, her presence alone would be a statement. "Look at what you lost. Look at what I gained." She began to mentally plan her wardrobe for the weekend. The Chanel ski suit, the Hermes snow boots, the custom-made Oscar de la Renta gown for the wedding itself, and jewelry, lots of jewelry. The 10-carat diamond ring Gregory had given her would be the centerpiece, a glittering testament to her upgrade. Every detail would be a weapon, every accessory a carefully aimed barb. She wasn't just attending a wedding, she was making a presentation on the unparalleled success of her life, and she would not abide a single flaw. The journey to Aspen was an exercise in performative wealth, orchestrated by Gregory, with the subtlety of a fireworks display. Their private jet, a chartered Learjet 75, was stocked with champagne that cost $800 a bottle, and a platter of sushi flown in that morning from Tokyo. Gregory made sure to loudly complain that his preferred jet, the Gulfstream G550, was unavailable. A complaint clearly intended for the two-person flight crew. Isabella played her part, sipping the champagne and laughing at his jokes, all while a knot of nervous energy tightened in her stomach. She scrolled through photos of the Starlight Ridge Resort on her phone. It was the pinnacle of mountain luxury, a sprawling complex of stone and timber that clung to the side of a cliff, offering panoramic views of the snow-dusted peaks. The penthouse suite Gregory had booked was larger than the house she and Leo had once shared. It featured a private terrace with a hot tub, a personal butler, and floor-to-ceiling windows that made the mountains feel like they were part of the decor. "Look at that," Gregory said, leaning over her shoulder, his breath smelling of expensive scotch. "That's how you do Aspen. None of that rustic cabin nonsense. If you're going to be in the mountains, you should be able to look down on them." His words resonated with her, looking down. That was the goal, wasn't it? Upon landing at Aspen-Pitkin County Airport, a private airfield catering almost exclusively to the ultra-wealthy, a prearranged black Cadillac Escalade was waiting on the tarmac. The driver, a stoic man in a black suit, loaded their mountain of Louis Vuitton luggage, while Gregory tipped him with $100 bill, a gesture both generous and ostentatious. The drive to the resort was breathtaking, but Isabella barely noticed the golden aspen trees or the crisp, clean air. She was rehearsing. She practiced her smile in the reflection of the tinted window, a smile that was warm but distant, conveying success without arrogance. She practiced the lines she would use when she saw Leo. Leo, it's been so long. You look, well. The slight pause, the careful choice of the word well instead of great or amazing, was crucial. It was a word that offered politeness without praise. The Starlight Ridge was even more opulent in person. A massive stone fireplace dominated the lobby, and the air was scented with pine and money. They were greeted by the general manager himself, a testament to Gregory's status. "Mr. Sterling, Ms. Vance, welcome back to Starlight Ridge. The Aspen Suite is prepared for you. Your personal butler, James, is waiting to assist with your luggage and any immediate needs," the manager said with a deferential bow. As they were escorted to the private elevator, Isabella felt the last of her anxiety melt away, replaced by a surge of confidence. Here, in this temple of wealth, she was a goddess. The world she had chosen was solid, real, and utterly unshakable. How could Leo, with his quiet life and his forgotten projects, possibly compare? They settled into the suite, and while Gregory was on the phone, barking orders at his subordinate back in New York, Isabella stepped out onto the private terrace. The air was thin and cold, but it felt electric. She looked out over the valley, the town of Aspen, twinkling below like a scattered handful of diamonds. This was her view. This was her life. The welcome reception was being held that evening in the hotel's fireside lounge. Isabella took her time getting ready, selecting a form-fitting cashmere dress by the row and pairing it with minimalist but brutally expensive jewelry from Buccellati. When she met Gregory by the elevator, he gave her an appreciative once-over. "Stunning, darling," he said, kissing her cheek. "You look like $1 billion. Let's go make your ex-husband regret every decision he's ever made." The lounge was already buzzing with guests. Familiar faces from her past life turned as they entered, their eyes widening almost imperceptibly. She saw the recognition, the quick appraisal of her dress, her ring, her companion. She was no longer just Izzy Leo's quiet, ambitious wife. She was Isabella Vance, Gregory Sterling's fiancée, a woman who had clearly, unequivocally traded up. She mingled, accepting compliments and air kisses, skillfully navigating conversations that danced around the elephant in the room, her very public divorce and dramatic lifestyle change. Chloe, the bride-to-be, rushed over and enveloped her in a genuine hug. "Izzy, you look incredible. I'm so happy you could make it," Chloe said, her eyes sparkling. "I wouldn't miss it for the world." Isabella replied, her rehearsed smile clicking into place. "You and David deserve all the happiness." Over Chloe's shoulder, she scanned the room. And then she saw him. He was standing by the large stone fireplace, talking to David. He looked the same, and yet different. He was still lean, but the subtle hint of stress that had perpetually furrowed his brow was gone. His hair was a little shorter, and he was wearing a simple, well-tailored dark grey sweater and dark jeans. No flashy watch, no designer labels she could identify. He looked healthy, rested, and maddeningly calm. A glass of what looked like club soda was in his hand. Her heart gave a strange, unwelcome lurch. For a moment she was transported back in time to a dozen other parties, just like this one, where he would stand quietly by the edge of the room, observing a thoughtful look on his face. He never needed to be the center of attention, a trait that had once endeared her and later exasperated her. Gregory, however, had no such compunctions. He spotted Leo at the same moment she did. Well, he said, his voice a low growl of amusement next to her ear. "There he is, the mad scientist in his natural habitat." Let's go say hello, shall we? Before she could protest, Gregory was steering her across the room, his hand possessively on the small of her back. The path parted before them, conversations quieting as people turned to watch the impending collision. Isabella's face felt hot, her perfectly applied composure threatening to crack. David saw them approaching and gave Leo a subtle nudge. Leo turned, and his eyes, a deep, intelligent blue she had once known better than her own, met hers. There was no shock in them, no anger, no sadness, just a quiet, unnerving flicker of recognition. The moment had arrived. The stage was set. And as she drew closer, Isabella prepared to deliver her lines, ready to cement her victory in the silent, undeclared war she had been waging for the past 5 years. The next day was reserved for guest activities before the evening rehearsal dinner. Gregory had arranged for a private ski instructor, a former Olympian, while Isabella opted for a spa treatment that involved a 24-carat gold facial. Everything was designed for maximum impact and comfort. As she lay on the heated massage table, the esthetician gently applying flakes of gold to her skin, she felt a profound sense of rightness. This was what life was supposed to feel like. Later, wrapped in a plush white robe, she sat in the spa's relaxation lounge, sipping cucumber-infused water and gazing out at the ski slopes. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from Chloe, a group text to the bridal party, and close friends. Change of plans for lunch. Instead of the terrace grill, meet us at Pine Creek Cookhouse. It's a bit of a drive, but the views are worth it. See you all at 1 p.m. Isabella frowned slightly. Pine Creek Cookhouse was a legendary Aspen establishment, but it was remote, located deep in the Castle Creek Valley. The hotel's concierge had mentioned that the final stretch of the road could be rugged. She found Gregory in their suite on a conference call, pacing and gesticulating wildly. He held up a finger, signaling for her to wait. After another 5 minutes of berating someone named Peterson for a missed deadline, he finally hung up. What is it? He snapped his good mood from the ski slopes, having evidently evaporated. Chloe changed the lunch plans. We're going to some place called Pine Creek Cookhouse. It's a bit of a drive, she explained. Gregory scoffed. Fine, whatever. Tell the valet to have the Escalade ready, and tell them to make sure it has the all-weather tires. I'm not getting stuck in the mud for some overpriced elk burger. An hour later, they were sweeping through the winding mountain roads in the climate-controlled comfort of the massive SUV. Gregory drove one hand on the wheel, the other holding his phone to his ear as he closed a deal. Isabella watched the stunning scenery pass by the golden aspen groves, giving way to darker pines. The road narrowed and grew rougher the smooth pavement, turning to graded dirt. Can you believe this? Gregory muttered, ending his call. Making us drive on a glorified tractor path. This better be the best lunch of my life. They finally pulled into a clearing that served as a parking lot. It was packed with luxury vehicles, Range Rovers, Porsche Cayennes, a few G-Wagons, and then, nestled between a brand new Mercedes and a gleaming BMW X7, was a car so out of place it was almost comical. It was a Subaru Outback, at least 20 years old. The forest green paint was faded and scratched with a noticeable dent in the rear bumper. A layer of dust and mud coated its lower half, suggesting it had seen many roads rougher than this one. It was the kind of car a college student drove, or a ski bum who lived out of his vehicle. Isabella stared at it, a slow-motion car crash of recognition happening in her mind. She knew that dent. She had been there when it happened, a runaway shopping cart in a Trader Joe's parking lot a decade ago. She remembered the specific shade of green chosen by Leo because it blended in with nature. And then the driver's side door opened, and Leo unfolded himself from the driver's seat. He was wearing the same sweater from the night before, and he stretched his back as if he'd been sitting for a while. Isabella's breath caught in her throat. A tidal wave of emotions washed over her shock, embarrassment, and a sharp, cruel spike of vindication. This was it, the ultimate proof. 5 years later, and he was still driving the same pathetic beat-up car. All his talk of breakthroughs and innovation had led to this a 2-decade-old station wagon that was probably worth less than the tires on Gregory's Escalade. Gregory followed her gaze and let out a short barking laugh. "You have got to be kidding me. Is that him? Is that his car?" He didn't wait for an answer. He put the Escalade in park, cutting off a sleek Audi trying to find a spot, and strode towards Leo, a predator spotting wounded prey. Isabella, mortified, but also morbidly compelled to watch, followed in his wake. "Leo." My man Gregory boomed, clapping Leo on the shoulder, with enough force to make him rock on his heels. "I almost didn't recognize you without a cloud of smoke coming from your engine." Leo looked from Gregory's smirking face to Isabella's carefully neutral one. He didn't seem flustered or embarrassed. He simply closed his car door with a familiar, dull thud. "Gregory, Isabella, good to see you made it." "We made it all right," Gregory said, gesturing back to his own vehicle. "In a car built this century." "Seriously, what is this thing? A family heirloom? Did you drive it all the way from wherever it is you live now?" "It gets me where I need to go," Leo said calmly, his eyes unreadable. This was her moment, the one she had been subconsciously preparing for. Her victory lap. All the pity and superiority she felt coalesced into a single cutting remark. She let a small tinkling laugh escape her lips, a sound she had perfected for just such occasions. "Oh, Leo, don't be silly." She stepped forward, reaching out to pat the dusty hood of the Subaru as if it were a stray dog. "It's charming, very rustic. It's good to see you're still so committed to nostalgia." The words hung in the crisp mountain air, dripping with condescension. She looked him directly in the eye, her smile unwavering, wanting him to see the chasm that now existed between them. His life was this dusty, dented car. Hers was the Patek on her fiancé's wrist and the diamond on her finger. Leo's expression didn't change. He looked at her, then at Gregory, then back at his old car. There was a flicker of something in his eyes, not anger, not shame, but something she couldn't quite decipher. It almost looked like patience. "Nostalgia's part of it," he said, his voice even. "It reminds me of where I came from, helps me appreciate where I'm going." Gregory guffawed. "And where exactly are you going in this thing, the scrap heap?" "Come on, darling," he said, looping his arm through Isabella's. "Let's go get a drink. I feel like I need to wash the sight of this poverty wagon away." He led her towards the restaurant, leaving Leo standing alone in the parking lot next to his old green car. As they walked away, Isabella couldn't resist a glance back over her shoulder. Leo was watching them go, his hands in his pockets. He wasn't glaring or looking defeated. He just watched, a silent observer to her triumph. She felt a surge of satisfaction, so potent, it was almost dizzying. It was done. She had seen the reality of his life, and it was even more modest than she had imagined. The last lingering ghost of her past had been exorcised. There was no doubt left, no what-ifs. She had won. She had chosen correctly. And as she stepped into the warm, inviting ambience of the restaurant, she felt lighter than she had in years, blissfully unaware that the ground beneath her feet was about to crumble. The rehearsal dinner that evening was an extravagant affair held in a private dining room at the hotel, complete with ice sculptures and a string quartet. Isabella was in her element, floating from group to group, a champagne flute permanently in her hand. The story of Leo's car had already made the rounds, courtesy of Gregory, who recounted it with theatrical flair to anyone who would listen. It became the evening's running joke. Can you imagine one of her old friends, a woman named Sarah, whispered to her by the Rawber? "I honestly feel bad for him. He's such a nice guy, but he just never got his act together. Some people just aren't ambitious," Isabella replied with a delicate shrug, spearing an oyster. "It's a shame, but what can you do?" She delivered the line with a practiced air of sympathy, but inside she was preening. Every expression of pity for Leo was an indirect compliment to her. She felt on top of the world. Yet, as the evening wore on, tiny discordant notes began to disrupt her perfect symphony of success. It started with an overheard snippet of conversation. She was passing a group of David's friends, men she vaguely recognized from the tech and venture capital world. "He flew in yesterday," one man was saying. "Kept it quiet. Said he wanted to avoid any fuss." "Typical Leo," another replied, laughing. "The man could buy the entire state of Wyoming, and he'd still probably show up in a rental Toyota." Isabella paused, her champagne flute halfway to her lips. "Flew in." She had assumed he drove from whatever backwater town he lived in. And the comment about buying Wyoming, it had to be a joke, a gross exaggeration. She dismissed it and moved on. Later, she saw David cornering Leo near the terrace doors. They were speaking in low, intense tones. David was gesturing emphatically, looking slightly stressed, while Leo just listened, nodding occasionally. It seemed more serious than a simple catch-up between old friends. But the most significant crack in her certainty appeared in the form of a man she had never seen before. He was older, perhaps in his late 60s, with silver hair and an impeccably tailored tweed jacket that spoke of old English money, not flashy American wealth. He carried himself with an air of quiet authority that made people unconsciously straighten their posture when he passed. He approached Leo, who was now standing alone looking out at the mountains. "Leonard," the man said, his voice a crisp British baritone. "A word, if I may." Isabella, standing nearby, pretending to admire a floral arrangement, strained to listen. Alistair Leo greeted him, a small, genuine smile finally appearing on his face. "I'm glad you could make it. I hope the flight wasn't too troublesome." "Not at all. The G700 is a remarkable machine. A testament to your team's work, my boy." "Truly revolutionary," the man named Alistair replied, clapping Leo warmly on the back. "G700. The name meant nothing to Isabella, but the tone of reverence in the older man's voice was unmistakable. "The board is ecstatic." "Of course," Alistair continued, his voice dropping slightly, but Isabella's hearing was now laser-focused. "The final valuation came in this morning, north of 50 billion. The deal with the Department of Defense is locked. Etherian Dynamics is officially a titan." 50 billion, the number was so large, it seemed unreal, like something from a movie. Etherian Dynamics. What was that? It sounded like one of the silly names Leo used to invent for his garage projects. It couldn't be real. It had to be a misunderstanding. Leo just nodded, a thoughtful expression on his face. "That's good news, Alistair. But we're just getting started. The real work begins now." "Always humble," Alistair chuckled. "It's why we backed you. Now about the Tokyo expansion." Their conversation shifted to logistics and international markets, the words flying over Isabella's head. But the number stuck in her brain, an insistent screaming alarm. 50 billion. She felt a dizzying sense of vertigo. She looked over at Leo, really looked at him, at the calm confidence in his posture, the easy way he conversed with this powerful-looking man, the complete and utter lack of concern he had shown about her, about Gregory, about the pathetic old car. It hadn't been the resignation of a defeated man. It had been the indifference of a man playing a completely different game on a level she couldn't even comprehend. "There you are," Gregory's voice slurred beside her. He had been indulging heavily in the open bar. "I've been telling everyone the story about the Subaru. It's a hit. People are calling him Lada Leo." He roared with laughter, drawing a few uncomfortable glances. Suddenly, Gregory's bragging his flashy watch, his loud pronouncements of wealth, it all seemed cheap. It was performative and insecure. He was a man desperate to prove his worth. Leo, on the other hand, seemed to have no need for proof at all. Isabella felt a cold dread seep into her bones. She looked at her fiancé, his face flushed with alcohol and self-satisfaction, and then back at her ex-husband, who was locked in a quiet, world-changing conversation. For the first time in 5 years, a terrifying thought wormed its way into her mind. What if I didn't just leave him? What if I left him right before the breakthrough? He always promised. She pushed the thought away. It was impossible. It was a joke, a misunderstanding. Leo was a tinkerer, a dreamer. not a Titan. He drove a 20-year-old Subaru, for God's sake. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and as she watched Alistair and Leo shake hands, a deal of unimaginable scale seemingly struck between them, she realized the whispers she had been hearing weren't just on the wind. They were the heralds of a hurricane, and it was heading directly for her. The morning of the wedding dawned bright and impossibly clear. The sky was a brilliant, sharp blue, and the sunlight made the remaining dusting of snow on the peaks glitter. The ceremony, Isabella knew from the invitation, was at a surprise location, with transportation departing from the hotel at 10 a.m. Isabella chose her outfit with military precision. A sophisticated Dior day dress in winter white, a sable-trimmed coat, and boots that had never touched actual snow. She was a vision of curated elegance. Gregory was nursing a hangover, grumbling about the early start. A surprise location. "What's wrong with the hotel's ballroom?" he groused, fumbling with his cufflinks. "This whole artsy, unpredictable thing is exhausting." Down in the lobby, the wedding guests were gathering a chattering flock of high-end winter fashion. The hotel staff directed them not to a fleet of buses or limousines, but to a series of sleek black Mercedes Sprinter vans. How quaint, Gregory sneered as they boarded. Shared transportation. Isabella settled into the plush leather seat, her mind still replaying the conversation she'd overheard. 50 billion. The number had kept her awake most of the night. It felt like a phantom, a ghost haunting the edges of her perfect reality. She tried to reason it away. Maybe Alistair was an eccentric old man. Maybe it was a different Leo. Maybe she had misheard. The van pulled out of the hotel's grand driveway, and instead of heading up into the mountains or down into the town, it turned towards the airport. A few other guests murmured in confusion. "Are we flying somewhere?" Sarah asked from the seat behind Isabella. "Maybe it's on a nearby ranch, and this is just the fastest way," her husband suggested. But they didn't stop at the main terminal. The van continued on through a security gate and onto the tarmac of the private aviation section. Isabella's heart began to beat a frantic, uneven rhythm against her ribs. In the distance, several private jets sat gleaming in the morning sun, their sleek fuselages reflecting the vast Colorado sky. The van slowed to a stop, as did the others in their convoy. The door slid open, and they were parked directly in front of an aircraft, so large and magnificent it dwarfed everything else on the airfield. It was a Gulfstream G700. Isabella knew the name now, the one Alistair had mentioned. It was a vision of white and silver, with long, elegant wings and two powerful engines mounted on the tail. It was one of the largest, fastest, and most expensive private jets in the world, a flying penthouse for billionaires and heads of state. This wasn't a chartered Learjet for a weekend getaway. This was a symbol of global power. The guests spilled out of the vans, their chatter silenced, replaced by gasps of awe. They stood staring, shielding their eyes against the sun, at the incredible machine before them. A red carpet had been rolled out to the aircraft's stairs. "My God," Gregory breathed, his hangover forgotten. "Whose is this? Did David's father rent it for the wedding? This must have cost a fortune." At that moment, Chloe and David emerged from the lead van, both beaming. Chloe, already in her wedding gown, looked ethereal. "Welcome, everyone," David announced, his voice filled with excitement. "We're so glad you could make it. For the ceremony, we wanted to do something a little different, something you'd never forget." Chloe took over, her eyes twinkling. "We're having it at the top of Cathedral Peak, and our very dear friend has graciously offered to fly us all there." She gestured towards the jet. And then, from behind the wing, Leo appeared. He wasn't wearing a pilot's uniform. He was dressed in a perfectly tailored dark suit that made him look taller and more formidable than she had ever seen him. He walked over to Chloe and David, placing a hand on each of their shoulders. He looked completely at ease, as if standing in front of a $75 million aircraft was the most natural thing in the world. The pieces slammed together in Isabella's mind with the force of a physical blow. The overheard conversation. "He flew in yesterday. The G700. Alistair's reverence. 50 billion. A collective, dawning realization rippled through the crowd of guests. Whispers erupted. Is that Leo's plane? No way. It can't be. David's best man. I thought he was some kind of engineer. Gregory stood frozen beside her, his jaw slack. The smug, superior smirk he always wore had vanished, replaced by a mask of stunned, uncomprehending disbelief. No, Gregory whispered, shaking his head. No, that's impossible. The guy in the Subaru. It's a joke. It has to be some kind of elaborate prank. But it wasn't a prank. The flight crew, in crisp uniform, stood at the top of the stairs, smiling professionally. Leo stepped forward and addressed the stunned crowd. Welcome, everyone, he said, his voice calm and steady, easily carrying in the still morning air. There was no trace of arrogance in it, no hint of a gotcha moment. He was simply a host welcoming his guests. The flight to the peak is short, about 15 minutes. Please find a seat and make yourselves comfortable. We'll be taking off shortly. He looked out over the sea of shocked faces, and for a brief, searing moment, his eyes met Isabella's. He held her gaze for just a second. There was no triumph in his eyes. No, I told you so. There was only a profound, quiet sadness. It was the look of a man who knew a truth she was only just beginning to grasp. Isabella felt the world tilt on its axis. The solid ground of her carefully constructed life had turned to quicksand. The man she had mocked, the man she had pitied, the man she had laughed at for driving a cheap car, hadn't just become successful. He hadn't just gotten rich. He had ascended to a stratosphere of wealth and influence so far beyond her imagination that it broke her understanding of the world. And as she stood there, paralyzed by the revelation, she understood. The Subaru wasn't a symbol of his failure. It was a symbol of his freedom. He drove it because he didn't need to prove a single thing to anyone, least of all to her. The flight was a surreal dream from which Isabella couldn't wake. The interior of the Gulfstream was less like an airplane and more like a futuristic luxury apartment. Cream-colored leather seats, polished dark wood, and brushed metal accents created an atmosphere of serene, understated opulence. There were distinct living areas, a club section with wide seats and tables, a dining area, and even a private stateroom at the back. The windows were huge oval portals offering godlike views of the jagged peaks below. Isabella and Gregory found seats in a four-person club arrangement sitting opposite Sarah and her husband. No one spoke. The festive wedding chatter had evaporated, replaced by a stunned, reverent silence. Guests touched the soft leather of the seats, ran their hands over the cool wood of the tables, and stared out the windows with wide, disbelieving eyes. Gregory was a statue of fury. His face was pale, his knuckles white as he gripped the armrests. He kept muttering under his breath, fragments of sentences. A front. Has to be a front. Shell company. No way. The Subaru. He was a man whose entire identity was built on a linear, easily understood hierarchy of wealth. The brand of your watch, the size of your car, the location of your apartment, these were the metrics by which he measured himself and everyone else. Leo had shattered that hierarchy. He had broken the rules of the game Gregory thought he was winning. As the jet ascended with a powerful, almost silent grace, Alistair, the silver-haired Englishman, came and sat in the empty seat next to Leo, who was near the front with the bride and groom. Their voices were low, but in the quiet cabin, their words carried. The press release is scheduled for Monday morning, Leonard Alistair said. We'll announce the Dodd contract and the updated valuation simultaneously. The Wall Street Journal and Forbes both have exclusives. They're running cover stories. The quiet genius who electrified the world. Isabella felt the words like daggers. The patent for the solid-state battery technology is the real jewel. Of course, Leo replied, his voice calm and technical. Ethereum's core innovation, doubling the energy density while eliminating thermal runaway. It changes everything. electric aviation grid storage, consumer electronics. It all came flooding back to Isabella in a sickening rush. The late nights in the garage, the whiteboards covered in complex chemical equations she never bothered to understand, his excited explanations about energy density and ionic conductivity that she had dismissed as geeky jargon. The time he'd almost set the garage on fire, and she'd screamed at him for being reckless, for playing with toys instead of getting a real job with a 401k. She remembered the exact moment she had left. She had found him in the garage, his face smudged with grease, but his eyes shining with an almost holy light. "Izzy, I think I've done it," he'd whispered, holding up a small silvery polymer square. "I've solved the dendrite problem. This is it. This changes everything." She had looked at the small, unimpressive square, then at his dirty hands, and then around the cluttered, oil-stained garage. And all she had felt was a profound, soul-crushing exhaustion. She didn't want to wait for everything to change. She wanted a new car now. She wanted the life Gregory was offering now. "I'm happy for you, Leo," she had said, her voice flat and cold. "But I can't do this anymore. I'm leaving." She had walked away from him at the very moment of his genesis, at the precipice of a discovery that would, as Alistair had put it, electrify the world. The company he founded, Etherion Dynamics, was now worth $50 billion. Not because he had sold out, not because he had gotten lucky, but because his quiet, obsessive work, the very work she had scorned, had actually truly changed the world. A wave of nausea washed over her. The gold facial, the designer dress, the 10-carat diamond on her finger, it all felt like cheap, gaudy plastic. She had traded a Rembrandt for a poster. She had cashed in her shares in the next Apple for a weekend in the Hamptons. Gregory finally snapped. He unbuckled his seatbelt and stood up, swaying slightly as the jet banked. "This is a joke, right?" he said, his voice too loud in the hushed cabin. He pointed a trembling finger at Leo. "You! How did you pull this off? Who are you fronting for? The cartel, the Chinese. There is no way a garage jockey from nowhere builds this." The cabin went dead silent. Everyone turned to stare. Leo slowly turned in his seat. His face was unreadable. Alistair looked at Gregory with an expression of pure, icy contempt, the kind of look one gives a bug before squashing it. Sir Alistair said, his voice dangerously quiet, "I suggest you sit down. You are embarrassing yourself." "I'm embarrassing myself." Gregory laughed a high, unhinged sound. "This guy drives a car that's a public health hazard, and I'm embarrassing myself." He turned to Isabella, his eyes wild with desperation. "Tell them, Bella. Tell them what a loser he was. Tell them about his stupid projects and his empty bank account." Isabella couldn't speak. Her throat was closed tight with shame. She just stared at him, this loud, insecure man she had chosen, as he completely unraveled in the face of a reality he couldn't process. Leo finally spoke. "Sit down, Gregory." His voice wasn't angry. It was tired. It was the voice of a man who had moved on so completely that this confrontation was nothing more than a minor, irritating distraction. The quiet command, backed by the silent, collective judgment of everyone in the cabin, finally broke through Gregory's rage. He deflated his shoulders, slumping. He fell back into his seat, a broken man, and stared blankly out the window, finally defeated. Isabella looked away from him, her gaze falling on her own hands, at the massive diamond that now felt like a shackle. She had built her entire world on a foundation of material wealth, believing it was the ultimate measure of a person's worth. And in 15 short minutes, Leo had demolished that world without saying a single word against her. He had simply shown her the truth. The real measure of worth wasn't what you owned, it was what you created. And while she had been busy acquiring things, he had been busy building an empire. The wedding ceremony was beautiful. It took place on a specially constructed platform on a ledge near the summit of Cathedral Peak, with the entire Elk Mountains range serving as the backdrop. The bride and groom said their vows against a panorama of impossible beauty, but Isabella saw none of it. The crisp mountain air felt thin and suffocating. The celebratory champagne tasted like ash in her mouth. She stood slightly apart from the other guests, a ghost at the feast, watching the man she'd left behind serve as the best man at a wedding held in the sky, a wedding made possible by his genius. Gregory was sullen and silent beside her, his humiliation a palpable aura. He had refused to even look at Leo. The power dynamic had been so utterly and completely inverted that he couldn't cope. His world, with its simple material rules, was broken. During the flight back to Aspen, as guests chatted excitedly about the ceremony, Leo moved through the cabin, thanking everyone for coming. He was gracious, humble, and utterly in command of his environment. Eventually, he made his way to her. Gregory pointedly turned and stared out the window. Leo paused by her seat. "Isabella," he said, his voice quiet. She finally forced herself to look at him. "Leo, I'm sorry if today was, uncomfortable for you," he said. It was a genuine apology, devoid of any irony. Why, she asked, the single word encompassing 1,000 questions. Why the car? Why didn't you say anything? He leaned against the seat opposite hers, his expression thoughtful. "The car was my dad's," he said softly. "He bought it new in 2005. He loved that car. We took it on camping trips, fishing trips. He taught me how to change the oil in it. After he passed, I couldn't get rid of it. Driving it, it keeps him close. It reminds me that all of this," he gestured vaguely at the luxurious cabin, "isn't the point. It's the result of the work, not the reason for it." His words were a gut punch. She had mocked a memorial. She had laughed at his deepest sentimentality, mistaking it for failure. As for not saying anything, he continued with a small shrug. What was there to say? "Hey, by the way, that project you hated is now a multi-billion-dollar company. That's not me, Izzy. You know that. I never did it for the money or the bragging rights. I did it because I believed in it." He paused, and his eyes softened, with a hint of the old affection she remembered. "I'm not angry at you, you know. You wanted a different life and you went and got it. I hope it's made you happy. Has it made you happy?" The question echoed in the silent spaces of her heart. She thought of her life with Gregory, a life of endless acquisitions, of keeping up appearances, of a love that felt more like a merger. It was a gilded cage, beautiful from the outside but cold and empty within. She had all the things she thought she wanted, but she felt nothing. She looked at Leo, a man who had stayed true to his passion, who honored his father by driving an old car, who possessed a fortune she couldn't comprehend, but found his joy in the work itself. He had everything, but it was clear that the jet, the money, the acclaim, they were just byproducts. His real wealth was his purpose. "I was wrong," she whispered the confession, so quiet it was almost swallowed by the hum of the engines. "About everything." He gave her a sad, knowing smile. It was a smile of closure, not of reconciliation. "We were just on different paths, Izzy. Mine was just a little longer and more complicated than either of us knew." He nodded once, a final gentle goodbye, and moved on to the next guest. Isabella was left alone with her reflection in the massive oval window. Below the world was a map of mountains and valleys, a world he was now looking down upon. She had spent 5 years gloating over a race she thought she had won, only to discover she had been running in the wrong direction the entire time. The victory she had so desperately craved had turned to dust in her mouth. She had her rich man, her designer clothes, her penthouse views, and in that moment, flying through the sky in her ex-husband's private jet, she had never felt so poor. In the end, Isabella's story serves as a chilling reminder that the brightest glitter often comes from the shallowest gold. She built her life on the shaky foundation of appearances, judging worth by price tags and success by the roar of an engine, only to have her world dismantled by the quiet hum of a jet. She learned the harshest lesson of all, that true wealth isn't worn on your wrist or parked in your driveway. It's forged in passion, purpose, and the quiet, unseen dedication to a dream. Her laughter in that parking lot, turned into a silent scream in her soul, an echo of the colossal mistake she made. What do you think? Did Isabella deserve her humbling moment? Or is there a part of you that understands the choices she made? We all know people who chase the shine, but how many of us have ever stopped to wonder what brilliance we might be leaving behind in the shadows?
What happens when a man's final cruel prophecy is shattered in the most spectacular way imaginable? For Emma Vance, the final words her celebrity ex-husband, Julian Thorne, ever spoke to her were a curse. "You're nothing without me. No one will ever want you. You will die alone." He said it with the smug certainty of a man who believed he had authored her entire existence. But what Julian didn't count on, what the world couldn't have predicted, was that the universe had a flair for irony. Less than 12 hours later, Emma Vance wouldn't just be fine. She'd be on the front page of every major news outlet, her name a global trending topic, all because of a single candid photograph, her hand held gently securely in the hand of the world's most enigmatic and untouchable billionaire. This isn't just a story about revenge, it's about what happens the morning after your world ends. The air in the penthouse was cold. It wasn't the fault of the climate control, a state-of-the-art system Julian Thorne had often boasted about in interviews for architectural magazines. It was a frigid, soul-deep cold that emanated from the man himself. Julian, with his perfectly coiffed silver hair and a smile engineered for talk show sofas, stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking down at the sparkling expanse of New York City, as if he owned it. In many ways, he thought he did. "It's all signed Emma," he said, not turning to look at her. His voice, the same one that calmed millions of his followers with platitudes about unlocking your inner power, was now clipped and sharp, a shard of glass. Emma Vance clutched the pen in her hand, her knuckles white. The final divorce paper sat on the vast marble island in the kitchen, a kitchen she had designed from the veining in the stone to the specific shade of brushed brass on the handles. It was a space meant for warmth, for laughter, for the life she thought they were building. Now, it was just a stage for her public execution. "I know, Julian," she whispered. Her voice was hoarse. She hadn't slept in days. For 10 years, she had been Mrs. Thorne, the quiet, supportive wife of the self-help magnate Julian Thorne, author of the global bestseller The Architect of You. She had been the one who edited his manuscripts until 3 in the morning, who fact-checked his research, who coached him through his anxieties before every major speech. She had sacrificed her own burgeoning career as an academic, specializing in Renaissance art, to build his empire, believing his success was their success. The cracks had started as hairline fractures. His casual dismissal of her opinions, his gaslighting her memories of events, the way he'd subtly mock her in front of their influential friends. Then came the affairs which he'd explained away as the unfortunate but necessary burdens of a man of his stature. The final break came when she discovered he wasn't just having an affair. He had a long-term partner, a younger, more malleable version of herself, already installed in a condo he'd bought downtown. Good. He finally turned his eyes, sweeping over her with disdain. She wore a simple grey cashmere sweater and jeans, a stark contrast to his tailored Zegna suit. She felt like a ghost in her own home. "The movers will be here tomorrow for my remaining effects. Your things? Well, you don't have much, do you? I'll have them put in storage. You have 30 days to collect them." Every word was a calculated blow. He knew her things were mostly books, research papers, and sentimental items from her family, things that held no monetary value to him. "Where am I supposed to go, Julian?" She asked the question, tasting like ash. The penthouse was in his name. The bank accounts had been systematically drained into trusts she couldn't access. Her lawyer, a timid man overwhelmed by Julian's legal Rottweilers, had managed to secure her a settlement that was, in Julian's world, pocket change. It was enough to live on for a year, maybe two, if she was frugal. It was an insult disguised as a severance package. He smirked, a cruel twisting of the lips that never reached his televised eyes. "I don't know, Emma. That's your problem now, isn't it? You wanted to be independent. So be independent." He walked over to the island, picking up his pristine leather briefcase. He didn't even glance at her. He was already moving on. Tears pricked at her eyes, hot and shameful. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction. She straightened her back, lifting her chin. "I will." Her defiance seemed to amuse him. He paused at the door, turning back for one final devastating volley. His face was a mask of mock pity. "You know, I almost feel sorry for you," he said, his voice dropping into the intimate conspiratorial tone he used on his podcasts. "You poured everything into me. You have no career, no connections of your own. You're, what, 36? Past your prime, darling. The world is a brutal place for women like you." He stepped closer, his expensive cologne suffocating her. He leaned, in his voice a venomous whisper, in her ear. "Let me give you one last piece of free advice, my dear ex-wife. No one will ever want you. You're nothing without me. You carry the stench of failure. Men of quality, men of substance, they want a winner. They don't want someone's discarded leftovers. You will die alone." He pulled back, a look of profound satisfaction on his face. He had delivered his curse. It was the final brick in the wall he had built around her heart. And then he was gone. The heavy door clicked shut, the sound echoing in the cavernous empty space. For a long moment, Emma didn't move. She just stood there, his words slithering into the cracks of her broken confidence. "No one will ever want you. You will die alone." She finally let out a ragged sob, collapsing against the cold marble. The city lights outside blurred into a cruel, glittering mockery. Julian was right. She had given him her youth, her intellect, her loyalty. And in return, he had taken her name, her home, her future, and left her with nothing but a curse ringing in her ears. In that moment, sitting alone in the ruins of her life, she believed him. The next few weeks were a blur of beige. Beige boxes, beige walls of a tiny third-floor walk-up in Brooklyn, and a beige, flavorless existence. Emma had found the apartment in a daze. It was all she could afford. The grand views of Central Park were replaced by a view of a brick wall and a perpetually overflowing dumpster. The scent of fresh orchids Julian insisted on was replaced by the smell of damp old wood and her neighbor's cooking. She unpacked the few boxes Julian's men hadn't accidentally misplaced. Her books, her precious companions, filled makeshift shelves. Her research notes on the artist Artemisia Gentileschi, a female painter who had triumphed over immense personal violation and patriarchal oppression, felt like a cruel joke. Emma had once dreamed of writing the definitive book on her. Now she could barely summon the energy to read the titles. Julian's curse echoed in the cramped space. "No one will ever want you." It became the soundtrack to her lonely nights. She'd scroll through social media, a masochistic ritual. Julian was thriving. He was photographed with A-list actors giving talks at prestigious conferences, and his new girlfriend, a model named Crystal, was splashed across his Instagram, always laughing, always perfect. He had already rewritten their history, painting himself as the patient husband who had finally freed himself from a negative and uninspiring partner. His followers lapped it up, flooding his comments with praise for his strength and authenticity. Emma's only lifeline was Chloe Davies. Chloe, a sharp-tongued, fiercely loyal art gallery owner, had been her friend since college. She'd never liked Julian, calling him a self-help vampire who drains the life out of everyone and sells it back to them in a paperback. Chloe showed up one Friday evening, armed with 2 bottles of expensive wine and a container of pad thai. She took one look at the apartment, and Emma's gaunt face and her expression hardened. "Okay, that's it," Chloe declared, setting the food on a wobbly IKEA table. "The moping is officially over. Operation Phoenix begins now." Emma gave a weak smile. "I don't feel much like a mythical bird, Chloe. More like a pigeon with a broken wing." "Nonsense," Chloe said, pouring a generous glass of Sancerre. "You are Emma Vance. You can spot a forged Botticelli from 20 paces, and you can recite Vasari's Lives of the Artists backwards. That sociopath didn't give you your brain. He just tried to convince you not to use it. We just need to remind you who you are." Chloe talked for hours, her voice filling the quiet apartment with life. She spoke of new artists, of gallery openings, of the vibrant world that Emma had been cut off from. Slowly, tentatively, Emma found herself correcting a point Chloe made about the use of lapis lazuli in the Scrovegni chapel, the old fire of her intellect flickering faintly. "See, she's still in there," Chloe said, pointing at her with a shrimp-laden fork. "Now for the main event." She reached into her designer tote bag and pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope. The cardstock was heavy, expensive. The calligraphy was elegant. "What's this?" Emma asked. "This," Chloe said with a flourish, "is your re-entry into the world. It's the St. Jude's Foundation Annual Benefit Gala, the biggest art world event of the fall. They're auctioning off a recently discovered Degas sketch. Everyone who is anyone will be there." Emma recoiled as if the envelope were on fire. "Chloe, no, I can't. What would I wear? Who would I talk to? Julian will be there. He's a patron." "First," Chloe said, ticking the points off on her fingers, "I have a friend at Marchesa who owes me a colossal favor. You will be dressed in a gown that will make angels weep. Second, you will talk to me. And third, screw Julian. Seeing you there looking magnificent and not giving a damn about him will be like a stake through his narcissistic heart. It's the perfect revenge." "I don't want revenge, Chloe. I just want to be invisible." "Too bad," Chloe countered. "Invisibility is cancelled. You've spent a decade in the shadows. It's time to stand in the light. Not for him, not for anyone else. For you. Remember the woman who wanted to write the Gentileschi book? The one who was passionate and brilliant? She wouldn't hide from a bully in a bespoke suit. She'd face him." Emma looked at the invitation. The St. Jude's Foundation. The very name felt like a sign. She thought of Julian's parting words, the poison of his curse. "You will die alone." Maybe he was right. Or maybe, just maybe, Chloe was. Maybe the only way to break a curse was to defy it. She took a deep breath, the first one that felt like it reached the bottom of her lungs in months. "Okay," she said, her voice stronger than it had been all evening. "Okay, I'll go." Chloe's smile was triumphant. "That's my girl. Now let's finish this wine. We have a phoenix to raise from the ashes." The ballroom of the Pierre Hotel was a galaxy of glittering chandeliers and even more glittering people. The air hummed with the low thrum of powerful conversations, scented with expensive perfume and ambition. Emma felt a wave of vertigo. For years, she had navigated these events at Julian's side, a silent accessory. Tonight, she was on her own. and it was terrifying. Chloe, true to her word, had worked magic. The Marquesa gown was a masterpiece of midnight blue silk that shimmered with every movement. It was elegant, understated, and fit her as if it were spun just for her. Her hair was swept up in a loose romantic chignon, and for the first time in a long time, the woman staring back at her from the reflection in a champagne flute looked not like a victim, but like herself. "Stop hiding behind the ficus," Chloe hissed, pulling her gently by the arm. "You look like a goddess. Own it." They circulated Chloe, greeting people with air kisses and sharp witticisms. Emma managed a few polite smiles, but her heart was hammering against her ribs. She kept scanning the crowd for Julian, a primal sense of dread coiling in her stomach. The auction began. The auctioneer, a man with a plummy British accent and a theatrical flair, charmed the room into parting with extraordinary sums of money for art vacations and experiences. Emma found herself genuinely captivated by the art, her professional eye assessing the works, her mind momentarily distracted from her anxiety. The main event was the Degas sketch, a delicate, intimate drawing of a ballerina tying her shoe. Bidding was fierce, paddles shooting up across the room. Emma watched mesmerized when she saw him. Julian. He was sitting at a prominent front table, his arm possessively around Crystal's chair, his paddle held high. He wanted the Degas. Of course he did. It was a trophy. Emma felt a chill and turned away, needing to escape. "I need some air," she murmured to Chloe, slipping away from their table towards a set of French doors that led to a small, secluded terrace. The cool night air was a balm. The terrace was blessedly empty, overlooking a quiet courtyard garden. She leaned against the balustrade, closing her eyes, trying to will away the image of Julian's smug face. This was a mistake. She wasn't ready. "It's a beautiful piece, isn't it, the Degas?" The voice was deep, calm, and startlingly close. Emma's eyes snapped open. A man was standing a few feet away, half hidden in the shadows, looking not at her, but out at the garden. He was tall, dressed in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, but he wore it with a kind of casual indifference, as if it were a second skin. "Yes," Emma found herself saying, her voice a little breathless. His use of line, "It's so economical, but it captures the entire weight and strain of the moment. It's not just a pretty picture." The man turned his head slightly, and she caught a glimpse of his profile in the dim light. Strong jaw, thoughtful eyes, an air of quiet intensity that was the polar opposite of Julian's performative charisma. There was something familiar about him, but she couldn't place it. "Most people just see the ballerina," he said, his gaze now on her. His eyes were a startling shade of grey, like a stormy sea. "You see the work." A blush rose on her cheeks. It was the first time in years anyone had seen her, and not the woman standing next to Julian Thorne. I studied art history. It was my field." Was he asked, a note of genuine curiosity in his voice? She corrected herself, a spark of her old self igniting. "It is my field." He smiled, a small, genuine smile that transformed his serious face. "Good." An awkward, yet not uncomfortable silence fell between them. From inside, they could hear the auctioneer's voice rising to a crescendo. "Sold to Mr. Julian Thorne." Emma flinched, the sound of his name a physical blow. She wrapped her arms around herself, the cold returning. The stranger's perceptive eyes missed nothing. "You know him," he stated. It wasn't a question. She gave a wry, bitter laugh. "He's my ex-husband. The divorce was finalized yesterday." The words tumbled out before she could stop them. She instantly regretted it. Why was she dumping her baggage on this handsome stranger? But he didn't recoil or offer empty platitudes. He just nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "I'm sorry," he said, and it sounded like he actually meant for the turmoil, not for the divorce itself. She shook her head, trying to dismiss it. "It's fine. I should go back inside." "Wait," he said, taking a step closer. The space between them seemed to crackle with an unexpected energy. "My name is Alistair." He extended his hand. She placed hers in it. His grip was warm, firm, and surprisingly gentle. A jolt, like a static shock, shot up her arm. "Emma," she replied. "Emma," he repeated as if testing the name on his tongue. "It was a pleasure to meet you, Emma, who sees the work." He held her hand for a fraction of a second longer than necessary. As she turned to walk back inside, her heart doing a strange, unfamiliar flutter, he spoke again, his voice soft. For what it's worth, he didn't deserve that sketch. He only sees the ballerina. Emma walked back into the ballroom, her mind reeling. She didn't see the rest of the auction. She didn't even notice when Chloe returned to the table. She was consumed by the brief, intense connection with the man on the terrace, Alistair. As the gala wound down, Chloe helped her navigate the exit. They were waiting for their car when a flurry of activity erupted near the main entrance. A swarm of paparazzi, who had been waiting for a politician to leave, suddenly turned their lenses towards the doors. Alistair emerged. And suddenly, Emma understood. The flashes were blinding. Shouts of his name echoed in the night. Alistair Sterling. The Alistair Sterling, the reclusive tech billionaire. The prodigy who had made his fortune in sustainable energy and now ran the Sterling Foundation, one of the world's largest philanthropic organizations. He was notoriously private, rarely photographed, and his presence here was a major event. He seemed unfazed by the chaos, his expression impassive, as his security team tried to clear a path. His gaze swept the crowd, and for a heart-stopping moment, his eyes met Emma's. There was a flicker of recognition, a ghost of the smile she'd seen on the terrace. Chloe was gaping. "Oh my God, you were talking to Alistair Sterling, the great white whale of the Forbes list." Before Emma could answer, the crowd surged. A clumsy photographer stumbled backward, bumping into Emma and sending her off balance. She gasped, expecting to fall, but a strong hand shot out and caught her arm, steadying her. Another hand instinctively found hers, lacing their fingers together in a firm, protective grip. It was Alistair. He had broken from his security cordon and was suddenly right there, his body shielding hers from the jostling crowd. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice low and concerned, meant only for her. She could only nod, speechless. The world seemed to slow down. The roar of the paparazzi, the shouting, it all faded into a dull hum. All she could feel was the warmth of his hand, the solid presence of him next to her. It lasted only for a few seconds. His security team quickly enveloped them, guiding them towards a waiting black sedan, a car far more imposing than the Uber they had called. He opened the back door, still holding her hand, and looked at her. "Let me give you a ride," he said. It wasn't a request. Dumbly, she nodded again and slid into the plush leather interior. Chloe scrambled in after her, wide-eyed. Alistair followed, and the door shut with a heavy, satisfying thud, sealing them in a cocoon of silence. The car pulled away from the curb, leaving the flashing lights behind. Emma looked down. Her hand was still linked with his. Across the street, hidden in the shadows, a freelance paparazzo, who had missed the main scrum, lowered his camera. He hadn't gotten a clear shot of Sterling's face, but he'd gotten something else. Something intimate and intriguing. A close-up of their hands perfectly intertwined. A story in a single frame. He smiled. This was better than a politician. This was gold. Emma woke up to the sound of a hurricane. Not a literal one, but the digital tempest of her phone vibrating violently on her bedside table. It buzzed and chirped with a relentless, frantic energy she'd never experienced before. Groggily, she reached for it, her mind still fuzzy from the surreal events of the previous night. Alistair's driver had dropped her and Chloe off, a polite and formal goodbye hanging in the air. The feeling of his hand in hers lingered like a phantom limb. She squinted at the screen. 347 new text messages, 98 missed calls, a torrent of notifications from Instagram, Twitter, and news apps she didn't even remember installing. Her blood ran cold. This was the kind of attention Julian received, not her. Her thumb trembled as she swiped to open a text from Chloe. It was a string of incoherent capital letters and a link. Chloe, Emma. Oh my God, holy Sikh, look at this now. With a deep sense of foreboding, she clicked the link. It took her to the homepage of TMZ. And there it was. The lead story. The photograph. It was an artful shot, tightly framed and undeniable. Two hands. Her hand, recognizable by the delicate silver ring her grandmother had left her, was entwined with a man's larger, stronger hand. The cuff of a tuxedo and a sliver of an impossibly expensive-looking watch were visible. The headline screamed, "Mystery Woman, Reclusive Billionaire, Alistair Sterling, in Shockingly Public Romance." She dropped the phone as if it had burned her. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. She scrambled to open other news sites. Page 6. The Daily Mail, Vanity Fair. It was everywhere. The same photo. The same breathless speculation. Who is Alistair Sterling's secret girlfriend, the handhold seen round the world? Sources say the woman is a stunning brunette who spent the evening at the St. Jude's Gala with the tech mogul. She was the mystery woman, the stunning brunette. It felt like she was reading about a character in a novel, not herself. Then her stomach dropped as she saw the comments section. The digital mob was already at work. Sleuths were trying to identify her. And then someone did. A gossip columnist with a long memory posted a picture of her from 3 years ago standing behind Julian at a book launch. The narrative shifted with whiplash speed. Update: Sterling's mystery woman, identified as Emma Vance, ex-wife of self-help guru Julian Thorne. And that's when the second storm hit. Julian's storm. He hadn't waited. He hadn't stayed silent. He had gone on the offensive with brutal surgical precision. He posted a statement on his Instagram, a platform with 20 million followers. It was a masterclass in manipulation, cloaked in his signature brand of faux vulnerability. The post was a picture of him looking pensively out a window, a cup of tea in his hands. The caption began, "Friends, many of you have been asking me about the recent news. It is with a heavy heart that I must address this. As you know, I have recently gone through a painful and private separation. I have tried to handle this with dignity and grace, wishing only the best for Emma. To see these photos today is deeply concerning." Emma felt sick. Concerned, I have always been a supporter of Emma, even as we grew apart. But I fear she is in a vulnerable place right now. To see her latch onto a man of such immense wealth and power so quickly, literally the day after our divorce was finalized, is alarming. I pray that she is not being taken advantage of, and that this is not a cry for help or a desperate attempt to fill a void. I am worried for her well-being. I will be making no further comment on this matter as I wish to focus on healing. Please send her your positive energy. It was diabolical. In one fell swoop, he had painted her as a mentally unstable, desperate gold digger. He was the concerned, sensitive ex-husband. She was the pathetic, grasping woman. He had co-opted the language of therapy and wellness, a language she had helped him perfect, and turned it into a weapon against her. The comments were a tidal wave of vitriol aimed squarely at her. Wow, she didn't waste any time, did she, gold digger alert? Poor Julian, he's so classy, she's clearly a mess. I knew there was a reason he left her. She sounds like a parasite. Hope Alistair Sterling sees her for what she is. She's just using him for his money. The curse. You're nothing without me. No one will ever want you. He was making it come true, not by magic, but by the brute force of public opinion. He was branding her, defining her for the entire world, before she could even speak a word in her own defense. Her tiny apartment felt like it was closing in on her. The brick wall outside was a prison. She curled into a ball on her bed, the phone lying face down on the floor, still buzzing, still spewing poison. The shame was suffocating. He had won. He had utterly, completely destroyed her. She had defied his curse for one night, and in return, he had unleashed hell. The tears she had held back for so long finally came not as a gentle rain, but as a racking, hopeless storm. The knocking was soft at first, then more insistent. Emma ignored it, pulling a pillow over her head to block out the world. It was probably a reporter or a process server with a cease and desist letter from Julian's lawyers for besmirching his good name. Emma, it's Chloe. Open this door right now, or I'm calling the fire department and telling them I smell gas and a crazy woman with a vintage toaster. Reluctantly, Emma dragged herself to the door and unbolted it. Chloe swept in her face a mixture of fury and concern. She was holding a large bag from a fancy bakery and the morning papers, which she promptly threw in the trash. Don't read that garbage, she ordered. I've already seen it. That man is not a human being. He's a sentient, weaponized press release. Chloe took in Emma's tear-streaked face and crumpled form, and her expression softened. Oh, honey. She enveloped Emma in a hug. Don't you let him do this to you. Don't you let him win. He already has Chloe, Emma croaked. Look at what they're saying. The whole world thinks I'm some desperate, grasping social climber. He knew exactly what he was doing. Of course he did. Chloe said, her voice steely. This is his playbook. Control the narrative. Isolate the target. Publicly humiliate. He did it to that journalist who wrote a critical profile of him 2 years ago. Remember? He's a predator. Just then, Emma's intercom buzzed, making them both jump. Emma stared at it in terror. Don't answer it, she whispered. It could be the pizza I ordered for moral support, Chloe said, trying to lighten the mood. She pressed the button. Who is it? A calm, male voice, devoid of static, came through the speaker. It's Alistair Sterling. For Emma Vance. Emma and Chloe froze, staring at each other in disbelief. Alistair Sterling. Here, at her third-floor walk-up in Brooklyn. Let him in, Chloe hissed, suddenly galvanized. For God's sake, Emma, buzz him in. In a daze, Emma pressed the button. A few moments later, there was a quiet knock on her apartment door. She opened it to find him standing there. He was dressed not in a tuxedo, but in dark jeans, a simple gray t-shirt, and a lightweight jacket. He looked younger, less intimidating, but the same quiet intensity radiated from him. He was holding a small, unassuming cardboard box. Miss Vance. Emma, he said, his grey eyes searching her face. He saw the tear tracks, the fear. His expression wasn't one of pity, but of a kind of grim understanding. I know this is an intrusion. May I come in? She could only nod, stepping aside. He walked into her tiny living room, his presence making the space feel both smaller and safer at the same time. He glanced around at the bookshelves, his eyes lingering on the titles. I came to apologize, he said, turning back to her. My presence last night and my carelessness brought this circus upon you. I am truly sorry for that. It's not your fault, Emma said, finding her voice. It's his. It's my world that has invaded yours. Alistair countered, and I have some experience with this, which is why I'm here. He placed the box he was carrying on her coffee table. This is for you. She opened it cautiously. Inside was a sleek silver device. It's a secure, encrypted satellite phone, he explained. Untraceable, unhackable. My personal number is the only one programmed into it. Your current phone is a liability. The press can track it. It can be hacked. This is safe. Emma stared at him, bewildered by the practicality and foresight of the gesture. I also saw his statement. Alistair continued, his voice hardening almost imperceptibly. It was a cowardly and calculated attack. He is attempting to define you before you have a chance to define yourself. I will not allow that to happen. Chloe, who had been watching from the kitchen doorway like it was a tennis match, finally spoke up. Damn right. But how do we fight back? He has 20 million followers who think he's the second coming. Alistair met Chloe's gaze, giving her a nod of respect. You don't fight him on his battlefield. You don't sling mud. You render his attacks irrelevant by telling the truth, but on your own terms. He looked back at Emma, his focus entirely on her. He's accused you of being a gold digger. So we show them you have no interest in my money. He's painted you as unstable. So we show them your strength and intelligence. A spark of anger, hot and clean, finally burned through Emma's despair. He built his entire empire on my work. The words hung in the air. Alistair's expression sharpened. What do you mean, his book? Emma said, the story pouring out of her now. The Architect of You. It was supposed to be my book. My dissertation was on the philosophical concept of the self in Renaissance art, how artists and thinkers of the time constructed their public and private personas. It was about authenticity, legacy, building a life of substance. I had a manuscript, years of research. Julian, he took it. He read it, simplified it, stripped out all the academic nuance, and repackaged it with pop psychology buzzwords. He stole my soul and sold it as a self-help guide. Chloe looked horrified. Emma, you never told me it was that direct. I was ashamed, Emma admitted. And he convinced me that no one would ever believe me, that it was our project. Alistair was silent for a long moment, his jaw tight. He looked from the pain in Emma's face to the bookshelves crammed with her life's passion. Do you have proof? He asked quietly. Drafts, notes, emails. Emma's heart leaped. Yes, they're in storage, old laptops, boxes of notes. I have everything. Alistair's expression was now one of cold, clear purpose. He was no longer just a handsome stranger or a reclusive billionaire. He was an ally, a powerful one. Then, we have a new plan, he said. We are no longer on the defensive. He wrote that he's concerned about you. Let's give him something to be genuinely concerned about. He looked directly at Emma, and for the first time, she saw not just kindness, but a deep, formidable strength that he was offering to share. He tried to take your voice, Emma. I think it's time the world finally heard it. The next week was a whirlwind of covert operations and quiet strategy orchestrated from Alistair Sterling's minimalist Soho office, a place that felt more like a modern art gallery than a corporate headquarters. There were no reporters outside, no paparazzi. Alistair's world was protected by a level of security and discretion that was an art form in itself. His team, a small group of fiercely loyal and terrifyingly competent individuals, retrieved Emma's boxes from storage. They worked with a forensic IT specialist who recovered every draft, every time-stamped note, every email exchange from her old hard drives. They laid it all out on a large conference table, a mountain of evidence that traced the intellectual genesis of the architect of you directly and unequivocally to Emma. There were her early manuscripts full of complex academic arguments next to Julian's later dumbed-down versions with his handwritten notes in the margins changing her phrasing into marketable sound bites. It was a clear and damning paper trail of intellectual theft. Seeing it all laid out, Emma felt a profound sense of validation, followed by a surge of cold fury. "He didn't just steal my words," she said to Alistair, her voice shaking with emotion. "He stole my entire thesis on life. And then he used it to lecture the world and me about authenticity." Alistair stood beside her, his presence a steady anchor. Over the past few days, their alliance had deepened into something more. They'd spent hours talking not just about Julian, but about everything. She learned about his own past with the media, a vicious, untrue story about his family that had made him retreat from public life years ago. He learned about her passion for Artemisia Gentileschi, and he listened, truly listened, with an intensity that made her feel seen and heard in a way she never had with Julian. A quiet, powerful intimacy was growing between them, forged in the crucible of their shared crisis. "He won't get away with it," Alistair said, his voice low and resolute. "Now, we need to choose our moment." The moment presented itself a few days later. An invitation arrived for Julian to be the keynote speaker at the Global Integrity Summit, a Davos-like conference for tech leaders and media personalities. His topic, dripping with irony, was truth and transparency in the digital age. "It's perfect," Chloe said, her eyes gleaming. "It's his home turf. He'll feel untouchable. The hubris will be off the charts. He'll have the whole event locked down," Emma countered, a knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach. "I can't just walk in and accuse him." "You won't have to," Alistair said. He tapped a few commands into his tablet. A picture of a woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense haircut appeared on the screen. "This is Sarah Jenkins. She's moderating his keynote. She's one of the toughest investigative journalists in the business. She owes my foundation a favor for funding her documentary on dark money in politics. More importantly, she hates frauds." The plan was audacious. Sarah Jenkins, armed with a dossier of Emma's evidence, would conduct the Q&A after Julian's speech. She wouldn't ambush him with accusations. She would do it with his own words and with Emma's. The day of the summit, Emma felt sick with nerves. She wasn't at the conference hall. She was with Alistair and Chloe in a secure viewing suite nearby, watching the live feed on a massive screen. She had done her part. She had written a formal, eloquent statement and had given Sarah Jenkins her blessing to use her research, her words, her story. The broadcast began. There was Julian on a massive stage, bathed in a reverent blue light. He was at the peak of his powers, delivering a smooth, charismatic speech about the importance of living an authentic life. He even had the gall to reference his divorce. Recently, he said, his voice thick with false emotion, "I had to make a difficult choice to align my private life with my public values of honesty and growth. It was painful, but living your truth is never easy. Emma felt Alistair's hand find hers under the table. She gripped it tightly. Julian finished his speech to thunderous applause. He sat down beaming as Sarah Jenkins took the seat opposite him. She started with a few softball questions, lulling him into a state of comfortable arrogance. Then she shifted. Julian, your book, The Architect of You, is built on a very powerful central metaphor of constructing a life. It's incredibly detailed. I was curious about your research process. Julian preened. It was years of work, deep personal intellectual exploration. It really came from my soul. Interesting, Sarah said, looking down at her notes. Because I have here some academic papers from 2012, written by a then Emma Vance, that explore the exact same theme, the construction of persona in the Renaissance. The language is remarkably similar. For instance, you write, "To be authentic is to be the sole architect of your own reality." A fascinating turn of phrase. Almost identical to Ms. Vance's 2011 dissertation proposal, which states, "The Renaissance ideal was to be the sole architect of one's public reality." A flicker of panic in Julian's eyes. The audience murmured. Sarah pressed on her voice like ice. In Chapter 3, you discuss the facade of legacy, Ms. Vance's research uses the exact same term, the facade of legacy, in relation to the Medici family. On page 184, you use an anecdote about Michelangelo. That anecdote is lifted almost verbatim from an email Ms. Vance sent you in 2013, which we have a copy of. Shall I go on? The color drained from Julian's face. He was sputtering, trying to interrupt. This is an ambush. My work with my ex-wife was a collaboration. She was my partner. Was she a collaborator when you registered the copyright solely in your name? Sarah countered, her voice sharp. Was she a collaborator when you pocketed the entirety of the 8-figure advance? We spoke to your publisher. Her name is not mentioned on any contract. In fact, we have a statement from Ms. Vance herself. And then on the giant screen behind the stage, a picture of Emma appeared. Not a paparazzi shot, but a professional, dignified headshot they had taken days before. Beside it, her statement began to scroll. "I am not a victim or a gold digger," the statement read. "I am a scholar. The core concepts, the research, and the intellectual framework of The Architect of You were my work. I am proud of that work, and I will not allow it to be used to promote a false narrative of authenticity, nor to be used as a weapon to publicly shame me. The truth, as Mr. Thorne is so fond of saying, has a way of coming out." The room was in stunned silence. Julian Thorne, the great guru of truth, was staring at the screen, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. His carefully constructed world was crumbling around him, live in front of his most important peers. He was being exposed not just as a liar, but as a thief. The cameras zoomed in on his face, no longer smug, but pale and sweating. The architect had been unmasked, revealing nothing but a hollow frame behind the beautiful facade. The reckoning had arrived. The silence in the conference hall was a living entity. It was thick, heavy, and absolute. On the massive screen, Julian Thorne's face, once a carefully curated mask of enlightened confidence, was now a canvas of pure, unfiltered horror. The camera operator, sensing a historic moment, held the close-up, refusing to cut away. The world watched as The Architect of You was publicly deconstructed beam by rotten beam. He didn't just look guilty, he looked erased. In the quiet viewing suite, The only sound was the sharp intake of Chloe's breath. Emma sat perfectly still, her hand held firmly in Alistair's. She wasn't watching Julian's face. She was watching the words on the screen. Her words, her truth, finally illuminated for all to see. It wasn't a feeling of triumph that washed over her, but one of profound, solemn relief, like a patient taking their first breath after a long and suffocating fever. The noise in her head, the constant echo of Julian's gaslighting, and her own self-doubt had finally ceased. Alistair squeezed her hand gently. "How do you feel?" he asked, his voice low. Quiet, she whispered, a small, wondering smile touching her lips. "The storm. I think it's finally over." He brought her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles, a gesture of profound respect. "No," he said, his grey eyes soft but resolute. "The storm is just beginning for him. For you, this is the dawn." The fallout was a digital tsunami. Before Julian could even be escorted off the stage by stunned event staff, the clip was being sliced, diced, and shared across every platform. Thorn Fraud, The Great Pretender, and his stand with Emma Vance exploded globally. The initial trickle of outrage became a flood. Celebrities who had once touted his book as their Bible posted hurried statements of condemnation. Brands that had sponsored his podcast issued press releases severing all ties. His publisher, facing a public relations nightmare, released a statement within 3 hours. "In light of new information regarding the authorship of The Architect of You, we are immediately suspending all promotion and distribution of the title and will be conducting a full review of our relationship with Mr. Thorne." It was corporate speak for a public execution. Crystal, his model girlfriend, quietly deleted every photo of him from her Instagram feed. His powerful friends stopped returning his calls. The machine that had protected and promoted him turned on him with merciless efficiency. The final humiliating image came a week later, a grainy paparazzi photo of Julian unshaven and haggard in a wrinkled tracksuit, frantically putting trash bins out in front of his empty penthouse. The man who had preached about designing one's life looked like he had lost the blueprint to his own. Emma, however, refused to get drawn into the spectacle of his demise. While the world feasted on the schadenfreude she and Alistair were building, her new legal team, a phalanx of New York's sharpest minds funded by Alistair, moved with swift precision. The settlement meeting wasn't a negotiation. It was a dictation of terms. Emma sat at the head of the table, calm and composed, as her lawyers laid out the undeniable evidence of intellectual property theft and demanded reparations, not alimony, but a figure representing her share of the book's profits and damages for copyright infringement. Julian's legal team, knowing they were beaten, folded without a fight. With the first transfer of funds, she didn't buy a new apartment or a new wardrobe. Her first act was to sign the charter for the Vance Institute for Historical Studies. Its mission was clear: to fund and promote the work of scholars, particularly women, in fields historically dominated by men. Its first grant was awarded to a young art historian who had discovered compelling evidence that a famous sculpture attributed to a 17th-century master was in fact the work of his uncredited and forgotten sister. Her next meeting was with the acquisitions editor of a prestigious university press. The editor, a woman with kind eyes and a deep respect for academia, didn't just want to publish her original manuscript on Gentileschi. She wanted to publish a new expanded edition. "We also want you to write a new introduction," the editor said, "about your journey, about what it means to reclaim a narrative, your story. It's as important as the history you write about. For the first time, Emma cried. Not tears of sorrow or anger, but of overwhelming gratitude. Throughout it all, Alistair was her silent, steadfast partner. He never overshadowed her, never spoke for her. He simply created a space where she could be heard. Their relationship, born in the glare of a media firestorm, settled into a rhythm that was quiet, private, and deeply authentic. One evening, he came to her small Brooklyn apartment, the apartment she had decided to keep a reminder of, where she had started her new life. He found her covered in flour, attempting to bake bread, her tiny kitchen a chaotic mess. He didn't laugh at the mess. He simply rolled up the sleeves of his expensive shirt, washed his hands, and started helping her knead the dough. "You know," he said, his hands working alongside hers, "my life was very orderly before I met you. Every minute scheduled, every interaction vetted. I'm sorry for disrupting it," she said with a small smile. "Don't be," he replied, stopping to look at her, his eyes serious. "It was orderly, but it was grey. You brought the colour back, Emma. You make the noise of the world bearable." A few months later, they stood on the terrace of his penthouse. It was a crisp autumn evening, and the city lights spread out below them like a carpet of fallen stars. The space, unlike Julian's cold, minimalist trophy home, was warm and lived in, filled with books stacked on every surface and art that was challenging and personal. He handed her an advance copy of her book, The Power of Persona Artemisia Gentileschi and the Forging of a Legacy, by Dr. Emma Vance. Her name, her title, her work. She ran her fingers over the embossed letters. "I used to stand in a place just like this and feel like the smallest person in the world," she confessed, her voice soft. "He told me that I was nothing without him, that I would die alone." Alistair wrapped his arms around her from behind, pulling her close. "He was a fool," he murmured into her hair. "A man that insecure could never understand a woman like you. He didn't understand the irony of his own curse." Emma leaned back against his chest, finally understanding. "He thought it was an ending," she said, a sense of wonder in her voice. "But it was a catalyst. If he hadn't said those things, if he hadn't pushed me out so cruelly, I would never have gone to that gala. I would never have met you. I would never have found the courage to fight for my work." Julian's curse wasn't a prophecy. It was an accidental gift. His attempt to consign her to oblivion was the very thing that had forced her into the light. He had meant to be the architect of her destruction, but instead, he had merely laid the foundation for her magnificent reconstruction. She turned in Alistair's arms, looking up at him. The love she saw in his eyes was not the possessive, conditional affection she had once known, but a deep, quiet partnership built on mutual respect and a shared truth. The city lights below no longer seemed to mock her, but to celebrate with her. It was a new dawn, bright and clear, and infinite with promise. And it was all hers. Emma Vance's story is a powerful reminder that our worth is never determined by someone else's opinion, especially the opinion of those who try to diminish us. It's a testament to the fact that the end of one chapter, no matter how painful, is often the necessary prelude to a far better one. Her journey from a cursed ex-wife to a celebrated scholar, hand in hand, with a man who saw her for who she truly was, shows us that the most profound comebacks are rooted in reclaiming our own truth and our own voice. Julian's curse was meant to be her prison, but it became the key that unlocked her true potential. If this story of resilience, justice, and unexpected love moved you, please show your support by hitting that like button and sharing it with someone who might need to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next deep dive into the most incredible real-life dramas. What did you think of Julian's takedown? Let me know in the comments below.